Christmas my brother called me a waste of space in front of 43 people was the same Christmas I decided I was done apologizing for my life. I know. 43. I counted them later, standing in my car in my parents' driveway, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. 43 people who watched my brother point at me across the dining room table and say, with actual pride in his voice, like he was delivering a verdict everyone had been waiting for, "You know what your problem is, Vivian? You've never done a single hard thing in your life." And the worst part? My dad nodded. Not dramatically. Not the kind of nod you could call him out on later. Just this small, slow dip of his chin, like he was agreeing that yes, the weather had been mild this year, or yes, he'd have another role. Casual. Offhand. The kind of nod that said, of course, obviously, we've all known this for years. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I grew up in a family that had very specific ideas about what success looked like. My dad spent 30 years in commercial real estate. My mom ran the administrative side of his business for most of that time. Organized, efficient, the kind of woman who color-coded her grocery lists and made it look effortless. My brother, Connor, went straight from a finance degree at Penn State into a corporate job in Philadelphia, got married at 26, bought a house in the suburbs at 28. By the time he was 30, he had 2 kids, a finished basement, and the absolute unshakable confidence of a man who had done everything in the right order and believed the order was the point. I did not do things in the right order. I graduated with a communications degree and spent 2 years working at a marketing agency before I realized I was miserable in a specific, fluorescent-lit, soul-grinding way that I couldn't keep ignoring. I was good at the job. That was almost the worst part. I was genuinely competent at something that made me feel like I was slowly disappearing. I'd come home at night and sit on my apartment floor eating cereal and watching the ceiling fan turn and think, this is it? This is the thing I'm supposed to be doing for the next 40 years? So I quit. I had savings, enough for 6 months of runway, maybe 8 if I was careful. I had an idea I'd been sitting on for 2 years, a content studio, essentially. I wanted to create long-form documentary-style videos about working-class American communities, the kind of places that don't get told right, or don't get told at all. I've been doing it on weekends for a year already. Small stuff, local stuff. Building a channel called Middle of the Map on YouTube that had maybe 800 subscribers, and my complete, embarrassing heart in every frame. My parents found out I'd quit the agency the same way they found out most things, through Connor. I hadn't told them yet. I was waiting until I had something to show. A plan, a number, anything that would make the conversation feel less like a confession. But Connor called my mom to ask if I was okay, because he'd heard from someone at a mutual friend's birthday that I'd left my job. And then my mom called me, and then my dad got on the line. And the whole thing happened on a Tuesday evening while I was in the middle of editing a piece about a foundry in Youngstown, Ohio. My dad said, "Vivian, what exactly is the plan here?" I told him. I told him about the channel, about the subscriber growth, about the partnership conversations I was starting to have, about the documentary angle, about what I believed was actually possible if I gave it real time and real effort. There was a pause. Then my dad said, "Honey, YouTube is not a career." My mom made a small sound that meant she agreed. I said I understood their concern and that I was taking it seriously, and I got off the phone and sat there for a long time. That was March. The Christmas dinner was 8 months later. In between, there were other dinners. There was the 4th of July barbecue where Connor mentioned, entirely unprompted, that his neighbor's kid had just gotten promoted at Goldman and was 24 years old. He said it while looking directly at me. I said, "Good for him." Connor smiled. There was the Labor Day cookout where my aunt asked what I was doing these days, and I explained the channel, and she said, "Oh, like a hobby?" And I said, "More like a business," and she said, "That's sweet," and moved on. There was a Sunday dinner in October where my dad asked quietly, just him and me in the kitchen while my mom was setting the table, whether I had thought about going back. Not back to the agency. Just back. Back to something stable. He said, "I just don't want to see you struggle, Fee." His voice was gentle. I believe he meant it. I told him I was okay. I told him the channel had hit 12,000 subscribers. I told him I'd just gotten a small grant from a regional arts foundation for a piece I was developing about textile workers in North Carolina. He looked at me for a moment. "A grant," he said. like I had told him I'd found $1 on the sidewalk. I went home that night and I cried in the shower, which I had started to feel was a character flaw. And then I pulled up my analytics and looked at my watch time and my revenue projections, and I told myself out loud, like an idiot in my bathroom, you are building something real. Because sometimes you have to say it out loud to somebody, even if that somebody is just you. I kept going to the dinners. I want to be honest about that, because I know some people reading this or hearing this are going to think, why? Why would you keep putting yourself in that room? And I've thought about it a lot since then, and I think the answer is that I kept believing against all available evidence that there would be a moment where they would see it, where I would walk in the door and something would have shifted and they would be able to look at what I was building and understand that it was real. I also think, and this is harder to say, that I wasn't ready to accept that maybe that moment was never going to come. That the version of my family where my dad was proud of me and Connor respected what I was doing and my mom stopped asking if I'd thought about looking for something with benefits, that version might just not exist. And as long as I kept showing up, I didn't have to fully accept that. So I showed up for Christmas. It was at my parents' house. It always was. My mom did Christmas the way she did everything, completely, without mercy. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon and the specific kind of baked brie that I have been eating at that table since I was 9 years old. My aunt and uncle came up from Virginia. Connor and his wife drove down from Philly with the kids. Various cousins, my parents' friends, neighbors they'd been close with for years. The table had been extended into the living room. The good china was out. I arrived and hugged my mom and helped carry things from the kitchen and played with my nephew who was 4 and obsessed with construction vehicles and had no idea what I did for work and loved me completely anyway, which I tried to remember when things went sideways later. Dinner was fine for about 40 minutes. Connor had had, I think, 2 or 3 glasses of wine, which didn't make him mean exactly. It just removed the small, thin layer of social filter that usually kept him from saying every single thing he was thinking. He was talking about year-end bonuses, about the housing market, about some deal his firm had just closed. He was loud and expansive and the center of the table, the way he usually was, the way my parents smiled when they watched him be. At some point, my aunt asked me how my little video project was going. I said it was going well. I told her the channel had crossed 40,000 subscribers that month. I told her I had just been accepted into a documentary fellowship program in Austin. I told her the North Carolina piece had been picked up for screening at a regional film festival. There was a small, polite moment of surprise. A few people said, "Oh, that's great." Someone asked what the fellowship involved. I was explaining it when Connor leaned forward. "Can I ask you something?" he said, not unkindly. That careful, reasonable tone he used when he was about to say something he knew was going to land badly, but wanted to be able to claim later that he'd been calm about it. Like, genuinely, what's the plan? Long term? Because 40,000 subscribers on YouTube, that's not nothing. But it's also not exactly, it's a business, I said. I just explained that. I'm not saying it's not. I'm asking what the actual plan is. The plan is the documentary fellowship. The film festival, the grant I told Dad about in October. Yeah, but those are, he waved his hand. Those are things that sound impressive, but like, what does that translate to money-wise? What are you actually making? There it was. I had known it was coming eventually. It always came there. I told him what I was making. It was not a huge number. It was, however, more than he seemed to expect, because his expression shifted slightly. Not to respect, but to recalibration. And then he said it. I just think. He started and he leaned back and he looked at me with something that I can only describe as pity mixed with condescension, the specific cocktail of which he had perfected over 30 years of being my brother. You've never done a single hard thing in your life. Like actually hard. You quit when it got uncomfortable and now you're making videos and calling it a career and mom and dad are too nice to say it, but everyone at this table is thinking it. Quiet, not complete silence. There were still the sounds of cutlery, of a kid dropping something in the other room, of the neighbor's dog barking somewhere outside. But the conversation-shaped noise stopped, and 43 people were either looking at me or very deliberately not looking at me, which is worse. My dad looked at the table. Then he did the nod. I felt it move through me, that nod. I've tried to describe it to people since then, and I can never quite get it right. It wasn't devastating the way a yell would be devastating. It was quieter than that and somehow bigger. Like finding out a foundation you've been standing on for years was actually just the idea of a foundation. I put down my fork. My heart was going absolutely insane, and my face was hot, and I wanted very specifically, very clearly, to stand up and leave and never come back. But something else happened instead. Something in me went very still. "I'm going to say something," I said, and my voice came out calm, which surprised me. "And then I'm not going to say anything else about this tonight because it's Christmas and these kids are at the table." Connor started to say something. I kept going. I quit a job that was making me miserable to do something that I believed in. I have spent 2 years building a business from nothing on my own without asking anyone at this table for a single dollar. I have a grant, a fellowship, a film festival screening, and 40,000 people who have chosen to follow what I'm making. And you? I looked at Connor. Not with anger, actually. More like clarity. You haven't asked me one question about any of it. Not once. In 2 years. You've asked me when I'm going to get a real job. You've implied in various ways at various dinners that I'm a punchline. But you have never once asked me what I'm actually doing or why. I picked up my fork. "So no," I said. "I don't think I'm the one who's never done anything hard." And then I ate my brie and I didn't say anything else. I want to be clear that this was not a movie moment. My dad did not stand up and clap. Connor did not apologize. My mom changed the subject to something about the neighbor's new kitchen renovation, and the table slowly, carefully filled itself back up with noise. My aunt patted my hand at one point. That was it. I drove home that night, and I sat in my parking garage for a while, and I texted my best friend, whose name is... Well, she'd probably prefer I not put her name in this. I texted her and said, "I think I'm done." And she called me immediately and said, "Done how?" And I said, "Done performing for people who have already decided who I am." She said, "Good, it's about time." Here's what happened after that, because I know that's what people want to hear, and I also think it's the part that matters. I did not cut off my family. I want to be clear about that. I'm not interested in dramatic estrangement as a lifestyle. What I did was simpler and, honestly, harder. I stopped needing them to validate what I was doing. I went to Austin for the fellowship in February. It was 10 weeks. A cohort of 12 documentary filmmakers, and it was the first time in my professional life that I was in a room full of people who were doing exactly what I was doing and treated it as self-evidently legitimate. We worked 18-hour days. We critiqued each other's cuts with a seriousness that was almost aggressive. I learned more in those 10 weeks than I had in 2 years on my own. The North Carolina piece, the one about the textile workers, screened at the film festival in April. It won the Audience Choice Award. I cried in a parking lot again, but a different kind of crying this time. In May, I got an email from a production company that had seen the festival screening. They wanted to talk about a potential development deal. Not a guarantee, just a conversation. But the kind of conversation that meant they were treating me like a professional filmmaker, not a person with a quirky YouTube hobby. I told my mom about the development deal on the phone. She said, "That's wonderful, honey. What does that mean exactly?" I explained it. She said, "Will that pay well?" I said, "Potentially, yes." She said, "I'll tell your father." She did tell my father. He called me a few days later. He said he'd looked up the production company online and they seemed legitimate. He asked a couple of careful questions about the deal structure. And then, near the end of the call, he said something that was as close as I think he is capable of coming to what I had actually wanted. "I think you might actually make something of this, B." It was not "I'm proud of you." It was not "I was wrong." It was a small, qualified, conditional acknowledgement delivered in the same tone he used to tell me a restaurant he'd been skeptical of had turned out to be decent. I took it. Not because it was enough, it wasn't, not really. But because I had stopped needing it to be everything. That was the actual shift. The dinner gave me the dinner, but the months after the dinner gave me something else. The understanding that I was going to keep building this regardless of whether anyone in that house ever fully saw it. That I had stopped building it for them somewhere along the way without noticing, and now it was just mine. Fully mine. Connor texted me in June when the YouTube channel hit 100,000 subscribers. I had posted about it, he sent a thumbs up emoji. I sent one back. We had both said everything we needed to say at that Christmas table, I think. Some things don't resolve into reconciliation. Some things just resolve into a new kind of quiet, where you understand each other correctly at last. And what you understand is simply that you are very different people who happen to share a last name, and that is okay. My nephew is 5 now. He still loves construction vehicles. I visited in the fall and he showed me, very seriously, every single truck he owned and explained their functions to me for 45 minutes. I filmed a little bit of it on my phone. It won't go anywhere. It's just his voice explaining what an excavator does while the October light comes through the window in my brother's living room. I kept it. Some things you just keep. I still make videos about the places no one tells right. And still middle of the map. The development deal is moving slowly, the way those things do. But it's moving. The channel is at 120,000 now. Last month, someone in the comments said the North Carolina piece made them feel seen for the first time in years. That comment. I still think about that comment. I didn't quit something hard. I quit something safe that was making me into someone I didn't want to be. And I chose something hard. Genuinely, unglamorously, humblingly hard, and I am still in the middle of building it. I don't know how the story ends yet. That's the thing about doing this in real time. There's no final frame, no clean resolution where the credits roll and everyone knows it worked out. There's just the next piece, and the one after that, and the quiet accumulation of doing the thing you believe in, long after everyone who doubted you has moved on to doubting someone else. My dad thinks I might actually make something of this. Someday, maybe. He'll be right. I've thought a lot about that Christmas table. About the 43 people and the nod and the particular silence that followed the words my brother said out loud like he was doing me a favor. And here's what I've landed on. None of it happened to me randomly. The years I spent showing up to those dinners hoping something would shift. That was me. That was a choice I kept making. And the moment I finally stopped making it, everything that came after was also me. Cause and effect doesn't care about your feelings. It just records what you do next. What I did next was go to Austin, work 18-hour days with people who took the work seriously, submit the North Carolina piece, win an Audience Choice Award in a parking lot while crying in a way that felt completely different from all the other times I cried in parking lots before that. The outcome changed because the inputs changed. Not because my family finally came around, not because Connor texted me an apology, not because my dad sat me down and said he'd been wrong. None of that happened. And I got here anyway. I think about that a lot when I hear from people who are waiting for permission. Waiting for the moment when whoever doubted them finally sees it. I understand that. Wait. I lived inside it for 2 years, showing up to dinners that were slowly taking something out of me because I wasn't ready to accept that the permission was never coming in the form I wanted it. What I've learned, not from a book, not from anyone telling me, just from living it, is that integrity is not about being recognized for doing the right thing. It's about doing it anyway, in the long stretch of time, before anyone notices. When I was editing footage at midnight with 800 subscribers and no development deal and no fellowship and no film festival, and my dad had just said YouTube is not a career, that's when the integrity was happening. Not at the Christmas table. Not when the production company called. In the quiet, grinding, unglamorous middle. That's where character actually forms. Not in the moments of confrontation, but in the thousands of small decisions before them. To keep going. To not let someone else's ceiling become your floor. To be honest with yourself about what you're building and why, even when the people who are supposed to believe in you have already decided. Vivian didn't win because she had a great comeback at dinner. She won because she kept working when no one was watching. Connor's words stung because they were loud and public and came from her own brother at her own family's table. But they didn't determine anything. Her choices did. They always had. I still don't have a perfect relationship with my family. I probably never will. But I have something I didn't have 2 years ago. I know exactly who I am when no one is approving of it. And that, it turns out, is the only foundation that actually holds.